If you were an animal, which animal would you be? I'm not asking which animal you wish you could be. I'm asking which animal would you actually be. Gary Smalley and a group of colleagues back in the 90s came up with this way of thinking about personality types and how they correspond to a different animal, and they created an assessment you can take, some questions you can answer that spit out the results of which animal you are. But I've found that most of us can look at these four options and figure out pretty quickly who we are. And if we can't figure it out, the people we live with or the people who know it best can usually figure it out pretty quickly. So I want to share with you these couple of different animals and get you to think through, for some self-awareness, which of these animals might best represent who you are. And this is the lion, the beaver, the otter, and the golden retriever, and I'll explain the crow a little bit later. But the lion is the natural-born leader. They step into a situation, they take charge, they're able to bring order to chaos, they're able to settle things right down, they step in, and when there's an emergency or a crisis, they're able to settle it right down. And there are some lions in the room that I know of, people who are able to step into difficult situations and bring order to it. And they just naturally, as little children, you can see them naturally rising up as natural leaders. In middle school and high school, you can see the natural leadership abilities rise up in them. They're captains of their teams. They're naturally put in charge of different projects at work. They take charge of family functions. The lions among us bring a lot of order to our chaos. And then there's the beavers. The beavers are the doers. They get stuff done. Beavers get stuff done, and they're sure to make sure it's done right. And if they do it right and you come along and you mess it up, they're going to come back in and tidy it back up after you. I know there's some beavers in the room who, when something needs to get accomplished, the beavers are going to rise up. They're going to get it accomplished. They're really sometimes beavers, not all beavers, but some beavers don't have patience for meetings. Just tell me what to do. What are we trying to do? Let me get down to work. They don't want to sit around and talk about it. But then there's the otters. And the otters just make you smile. You just see an otter, and you can't help but smile. That's the otter personality, is the life of the party. An otter walks into the room, and everybody's like, hey, it's an otter. We're going to have a good time today. And the otters love lobby time here at church because there's all these different people they can interact with. Otters actually like people. And so they're really enjoy being around them. And I even know somebody who had their birthday party this year. They went and had a chance to interact with otters because they're just so much fun and there's so much joy of being with an otter. And that's what otters do. They just love people so well. And then there's golden retrievers. Golden retrievers love people too, and they just don't want to make anybody upset. A golden retriever just wants everybody to be happy. They avoid conflict. If a burglar breaks into your house, the golden retriever thinks they've made a new best friend. And like, hey, what are we doing? Hey, you come back tomorrow? What's going on? And they kind of got a pep in their step. They make a great family dog. That's why the golden retrievers make a great family dog, be around kids and grandkids, just not a very good guard dog. And so I want you to think about which one of those four you might be. And if you think this whole thing is stupid, you're probably a crow. So take a minute and turn to your neighbor. Tell them which one you think you are. If your neighbor says one and you know they're wrong, set them straight. Just take a minute. And if you're watching online or over at Dunmire, take a minute to do this too. How many lions do we have? Lions, all right. How many beavers do we have? Otters, golden retrievers. I'm not going to ask you how many crows because I want to talk to you about the crows for a second. You can love your neighbor as a lion. You can love your neighbor as an otter, as a beaver, as a golden retriever. But it's hard to love your neighbor as a crow. There's a study done. We've been in the series looking at how do we love our neighbors well, and I want to think about these different personality types. There's different temperaments. You don't have to be an extrovert to love your neighbor. You don't have to be you're not disadvantaged as an introvert at how to love your neighbor. There was a professor on a college university campus who, in 2006, decided to run this little experiment. He put on an ogre mask, and he went out on the university campus, and he trapped a few crows, tagged them, and then set them free. And the whole thing just took a few minutes, didn't last very long, and he was curious to see how the crows would react to the ogre mask moving forward. If they'd be able to differentiate, because crows are pretty smart, between him as a person and somebody wearing the ogre mask. So he comes out the next day wearing the ogre mask again, and the crows start squawking, and they're dive bombing him, and they're very alerted to his presence on the campus at that point. And the next day he comes out again. He walks around without the ogre mask, no squawking, no crowing, no dive bombing, puts the ogre mask back on, and they're dive bombing, and they're squawking, they're carrying on. The next week, the same thing happens. He can walk across campus, no big deal, puts the ogre mask on, and the crows are making his presence known. He tries giving the ogre mask to somebody else. Same thing happens. They're dive bombing, they're squawking, they're carrying on, and he walks across campus with a mask on, same thing happens. This goes on for weeks, for months. It started in 2006. The crows finally stopped squawking in 2023, 17 years later. 17 years of squawking, of nursing this grudge against the ogre for something that just happened really just for a few moments. Hey, you can love your neighbor as a lion. You can love your neighbor as a beaver, as an otter, as a golden retriever. It's a big deal to nurse a grudge for that long, and it's really hard to love our neighbors as a crow. We've been talking about how we love our neighbors. We're talking about the Jericho Road. This is the setting of the Good Samaritan parable, that Jesus, perhaps his most famous parable. And thinking about how we love our neighbors, and one of the things that always becomes an impediment to our ability to love our neighbors is grudges. Is these 17-year grudges, these grudges that just kind of stretch out for it seemed like they're going to go on for eternity as they stretch on and take on a life of their own. So we're going to talk about this morning about how we can overcome that, how we can, what some alternatives to nursing the grudge are. And we're going to do this looking at the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis. We're going to jump from Genesis 37 to 42, and then eventually Genesis chapter 50, kind of looking at a survey of Joseph's life. And before we do, I want to say good morning to our friends who are joining us online, our friends over at Dunmire, and we've got our Reach partners in the lobby, our local Reach partners with the Reach booths. And so if you haven't had a chance to interact with them on your way in, these are all of our partners, some of our partners, and we have a reach that goes beyond just the walls of this church and beyond the walls of our Elmira campus. And so I really encourage you to take a moment and hear some of what God is doing through our Reach partners out there. But before we jump into Genesis 37, I'd like to just ask for God's help and his presence in our reading of his word. So Lord, we're available to you. We've made ourselves available to you and unavailable to so many other things so that we can be completely and utterly available to you. And we ask for your help as we open up your word, for your voice to speak to us through your word, right where we're living, right where we're at. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Genesis 37, beginning of verse 19. Jumping right in here towards the beginning of the story with Joseph, this is his brother speaking. They say, "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him in one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." And when Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and to take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There's no water in it. The last 14 chapters of the book of Genesis are telling the story of Joseph's life. You think about the book of Genesis, you probably think about creation, maybe think about Noah and the flood, you think about the fall, but 14 chapters, the final 14 chapters of the book of Genesis are the story of Joseph and his brothers and this tension that falls with them. I was really tempted this morning just to read Genesis 37 through 50. Just have a Bible reading party and read through it, no sermon, and then go on, unpack it on your own. But I want to kind of jump through some of the main highlights of his story. And one of the really interesting things about the story of Joseph and the way the Bible ends with these 14 chapters of his story is that it's really the culmination of this thread that runs through the whole book of Genesis. It's this thread of sibling rivalry. It's this thread of conflict between brothers and siblings. And just to give you an example, let's look at some of the examples of brotherly tension in Genesis. It begins in Genesis chapter 4 with Cain and Abel, the first siblings, the first offspring of Adam and Eve, and right out of the gate, Cain kills Abel because he's jealous of God's pleasure in his sacrifice. If you've ever gone on a family vacation, you can't get to the first rest area without somebody having to go to the bathroom or without somebody in the back seat squabbling with somebody else in the back seat. Here we are in the 4th chapter of God's holy word, and there's already 2 siblings who can't get along, and Cain kills Abel. It's awful. Second example we see this is Jacob and Esau. This is in Genesis 25 through 36. And Jacob and Esau are brothers, and there's some rivalry that's famous between the two of them, and Jacob tricks Esau into giving him his blessing, to buy his blessing from him, and then later on Jacob tricks his father into, or the birthright that is, and then later on Jacob tricks his father into giving Jacob the blessing that was due to Esau, and there's a rift between the two of them, and Jacob ends up on the run. There's sort of a patching up of this relationship later on, but there's this long drawn-out story, a famous story of Jacob and Esau and the rift and the tension that's between these two brothers. Even Perez and Zerah, these are the twins who are in the womb are competing with one another. It begins that when the time comes for the babies to be born, Zerah sticks his hand out of the womb first, and the midwife ties a scarlet thread around his wrist, and then he pulls his hand back in, and the other brother is born first. And there's this question of which one counts as being born first, and there's this natural sibling rivalry that emerges right out of the womb, and it makes their mother no doubt say, why must everything be a competition with the two of you? And then finally it culminates in the story of Joseph and his brothers in Genesis 37 through 50. As his brothers are jealous of him, and sure, there's some things that Joseph could have done different. He seems to be a little bit boastful and unsensitive to the way his brothers are going to take some of the things he's saying, but they plot against him, and they scheme against him. They fake his death, throw him in a cistern, end up selling him into slavery, and their poor father is heartbroken over the idea that Joseph has been killed by a wild animal, and they think that that's the end of the story of Joseph. Before we move on, thinking about the rest, what becomes of the story of Joseph, I want you to take stock of the grudges in your own heart. Where bitterness is rising up in your own heart. Where there's a little bit of a crow tendency to let a 17-year grudge begin to grow up in your heart. Take stock of your own heart and what that looks like for you, where there's some areas of bitterness that have taken root. I like the way Walter Wongren Jr. says it. He says, a grudge may be strong, but a grudge isn't strength. A grudge may be strong, but it's not strength. Sometimes we're easily deceived into thinking that a grudge is a sign that I'm not going to be taken advantage of, I'm not going to be fooled again, I'm no pushover, and we become embittered and brittle over some bitterness that rises up in our heart. And Walter Wongren Jr. beautifully saying it's not a sign of strength, actually. It's a sign of weakness. So as you think about what this looks like in your own life, this is a huge story we're trying to fly through in the life of Joseph. We leave off in Genesis 37. He's sitting in a cistern. He ends up getting sold into slavery, ends up spending years in prison. But lo and behold, it's a real rags to riches story. He ends up being raised up to the second in power of all of Egypt, and a famine strikes. Egypt has plenty of grain because of his careful planning, because of what the Lord had revealed to him. But back home, his brothers and his father are out of food. And so they come to Egypt looking to see if they can buy some grain. And who do you think the brothers have to come and ask for that grain from but Joseph, the brother they think is long gone? This is what happens in verse 6. Now Joseph was governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all of its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. And as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from, he asked. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they didn't recognize him. And then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, you're spies. You've come to where our land is, to see where our land is unprotected. No, my lord, they answered him. Your servants have come to buy food. We're all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies. Jump into verse 21. They said to one another, surely we're being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but he would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. And Joseph turned away from them and began to weep. And then he came back and spoke again. Here's this principle we're seeing right out of the gate here, that you can't outrun a grudge. This bitterness, this kind of seething unforgiveness will always resurface again someplace else. You might think you've thrown it in a cistern and it's gone. It's going to pop back up again. You might run to Egypt, but it's going to pop back up again. That all the time we see this over and over again in our lives and throughout history, that bitterness, that's unresolved bitterness, unresolved grudges always have a way of bubbling back up again. There's a story about a biosphere in Tucson, Arizona, where they carefully crafted this kind of self-contained utopia, and they invited 8 people, 4 men, 4 women, to live in this utopia, this biosphere, for 2 years. And they put them through rigorous psychological evaluation and a bunch of surveys and interviews to make sure that they had the right 8 people to come and live in this biosphere for 2 years. And when they came out of the biosphere after 2 years, and everybody's eager to hear, how did it go? What did you learn? What did you take away from this? They found out within a couple months of being in the biosphere, a group of them had such a sharp disagreement that they split up into 2 groups. And the last few months that they were in the biosphere together, some of them stopped speaking to each other entirely. 8 people in a biosphere in this perfect utopia, climate controlled and all the things. And there's just 8 people. That's all it took for this splintering to happen, that they stopped even talking to each other. That's in utopia. Among POWs, there was a group of POWs in Lebanon, American hostages, who were being held in Lebanon. And when they were finally released after years of being held as hostages, that one of the POWs revealed that actually a group among the American POWs, there had been such a sharp disagreement that some of them hadn't been talking to each other in years. Some of those who were chained together in the cells refused to speak to each other because of such a sharp disagreement arising among them. Doesn't matter where we go from this. It's in every office, it's in every home, it's in every church, it's in every POW camp, it's in every biosphere. This rift that rises up between us, and the way that we hold on to these 17-year grudges that just take on a life of their own. I like the way Lisa Turkhurst put it. She said, bitterness doesn't protect me or prove anything. It just turns me into someone I don't want to be. Bitterness doesn't put up a barrier between us and problems. It doesn't insulate us from headaches or difficulties. It just turns you into someone that at the end of the day, you're going to find unrecognizable to the person you want to be. And I love the way that Joseph responds to this. Joseph, who could have gotten caught up in a 1,700-year grudge, instead, he welcomes his brothers back. He gives them safe harbor after he's had his fun of pretending that he's not really their brother and pretending that he's someone else. He finally reveals that he's Joseph, long-lost brother. Go get Dad. Bring everybody back here. And we see this pick up in Genesis chapter 50, beginning of verse 15. After their father has died, after Jacob has died, the brothers get nervous. What if he was just being nice to us because of Dad? And now Dad's not here to protect us. And this is what happens in verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers, the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of your servants, of the God of your father. And when the message came to him, Joseph wept. I think part of what we're seeing here, by the way, is just projection. Why would Joseph's brothers be so convinced that their brother's going to have a grudge against them? Because that's what they would do. Why would they be so convinced that their brother is just manipulating them or lying to them or deceiving them? Because that's what they would do. Why would they be so convinced that he's not really telling them the truth? Because that's what they would do. And so this is a classic example of projection, but Joseph doesn't sink to their level. Joseph could sink to the level and say, Dad's not here anymore, you're stuck with me, guess what, I'm going to throw you in a cistern like you threw me into a cistern. I'm going to sell you into slavery the way you sold me into slavery. But no, he says, this ends with me. No further. This line that's been running through, this thread that's been running through the entire book of Genesis, it ends with me. And he doesn't sink to their level. Naturally, Cain kills Abel. Supernaturally, Joseph forgives his brothers. Naturally, Jacob and Esau are rivals who have a falling out. Supernaturally, Joseph protects his brothers and gives them safe shelter. Naturally, Perez and Zerah are competitors from the womb. Supernaturally, we can trade sibling rivalry for brotherly love. Naturally, Joseph's brothers fake his death and sell him into slavery. Supernaturally, Joseph doesn't repay evil for evil. Naturally, we nurse the grudge, but supernaturally, we starve the grudge. Naturally, we sharpen the edge. Naturally, we sharpen the hatchet. Naturally, we rehearse all the wrongs that have been done to us and that we imagine have been done to us. Supernaturally, we bury the hatchet. Naturally, we get even with our enemies. Supernaturally, we forgive our enemies. Naturally, we want the person we think did us wrong to get what they have coming. But supernaturally, we know that we're only a half a step away from stupid ourselves, and so we forgive those who've wronged us. Naturally, we think that our grudge shows that we insist on justice, shows that we're strong, that we're not going to be taken advantage of. But supernaturally, we know, as Walter Wongren Jr. says, a grudge may be strong, but a grudge is not strength. Naturally, we think that a grudge will protect us, will insulate us from troubles outside. But as Lisa said, bitterness does not protect me or prove anything. It just turns me into someone I don't want to be. Naturally, the climax, the culmination of the book of Genesis would be that the younger brother who has been so wronged would finally get justice. He would finally triumph over his enemies, that those who wronged him would get what they have coming. But supernaturally, the book of Genesis ends with this brother who has been so wronged for all these years, forgiving those who've wronged him and saying these beautiful words in Genesis 50. It's the climax of the book of Genesis. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Not a hint of crow. No squawking. He speaks kindly to them and says, no, don't worry. It's not going to be like that. He says, it ends with me. This mean streak, it ends with me. the opportunity to get even, though I have the best opportunity to get even that has ever happened in the history of the world, I'm not going to take it. I'm going to take it as an opportunity to love you. So I want to invite you to consider 4 keys from what we're talking about here, 4 keys from the life of Joseph and from what we're seeing throughout Scripture about forgiveness and bitterness. And the first is that a grudge weighs too much to carry. I hope that you can forgive the people who've wronged you for their sake. That's the most pure form of forgiveness, when you forgive them for their sake, to let them off the hook, to wipe the slate clean, to act as though it never happened again. But I know a lot of us aren't there yet. And if you're not there yet, at least forgive them for your sake, because it'll crush you. That weight of a grudge, that weight of a 17-year grudge, or the weight of unforgiveness, the weight of bitterness, I've watched it rock so many people and ruin them. And eventually they become a person that they never would have hoped or never would have wanted to become, all because of something that they couldn't let go of. That's first. Second is mandatory. Forgiveness is mandatory, but so might be boundaries. Often whenever we talk about forgiveness, somebody's like, do I have to act as though it never happened? Does it mean I have to let them back into my life? There's a difference between a grudge and a boundary. A grudge says, I'm going to hold this against you. A boundary says, I'm not going to hold this against you anymore, but there's some trust that needs to be rebuilt. A grudge says, I'm wishing for your wrong. I'm wishing for your harm. A boundary says, I'm not wishing for your harm, but I'm not going to give you another chance to harm me. And so there's a difference between setting some boundaries and holding a grudge. And sometimes for the person who's on the other side of the boundary, it might feel like a grudge, but it's really a matter of your heart and your posture towards that person, whether it's a grudge or whether it's simply a boundary to protect yourself from them. You might forgive the person who broke into your home, but it doesn't mean you're going to let them break into your home again. And so that's the second thing. The third thing is that forgiveness is unearned and reconciliation is earned. This is tied to the first one. So I think the most pure form of forgiveness is when it's as though it never happened. It's reconciliation is complete. We can turn over a new leaf. We can turn a new page and start over again. It's a whole new chapter. But there's usually a process of, many times a process of reconciliation that has to happen. You can forgive someone now, but yet say, there's some trust that needs to be rebuilt. I forgive you for what you did, but there's some trust that the bridge needs to be rebuilt in our relationship so that we can trust one another again, so that I can trust you. And so there may be some steps that you've got to take of thinking what it looks like for that person who needs to be forgiven, of giving them an opportunity, if there is, to have full reconciliation and to fully heal that relationship. And lastly, grudges are contagious. They take on a life of their own, and before you know it, it's spread out, it's spread through your life, it's taken over, it's obscured the way you look at the world, and you're nursing a 17-year grudge that you never intended to have as a roommate, but it's taken up residence in your home. In fact, that's what happened with the crows. You can love your neighbor as a lion or a tiger or a bear, oh my, or a beaver or an otter or a zebra or a penguin or whatever your animal is, but it's hard to love your neighbor as a crow. And they developed this murder of crows. That's the name of a group of crows, as I understand. This murder of crows, appropriately named, develops this 17-year grudge. And I was surprised to hear that crows actually live that long. And it turns out they don't live that long. Crows only live 8 to 10 years. And yet they have this grudge that lasts 17 years. How does that happen? Because it just spread through the group. Crows who weren't even alive yet, crows who weren't even born yet when that first incident happened, are still squawking and carrying on 17 years later just because they don't even know why. There's just this grudge that has been taken on a whole new life through the contagion of this group. There was a real thing that happened. There was a net, and these crows were caught in the net and released. But they've been free for 17 years. And they spent those 17 years caught up in an invisible net of bitterness. Naturally, we nurse the grudge. Supernaturally, we let it go. So let it go. I think we've all had enough squawking. I think we've all had enough nursing the grudge. Maybe today's the day to drop the net and fly free for the first time in a long time. Let's pray together. Lord, you know the faces and names and incidents that have come to mind this morning. The nagging resentments and bitterness that have crept in and taken up residence in our hearts and lives. And Spirit, we're not strong enough to do it. Holy Spirit, we can't do it in our own strength. So would you help us to overcome our natural tendencies and to live in the supernatural forgiveness that you call us to. Jesus, we hear your words that you taught us to pray that we forgive those who've sinned against us as we seek the forgiveness of our own sins. And your hard teaching that unless we forgive those who've sinned against us, our Father in heaven won't forgive us. So Lord, help us to forgive. To not nurse the grudge, to have healthy boundaries where they need to be, not fueled by a grudge, not fueled by bitterness labeled as a boundary. To have opportunities for reconciliation, but to drop the net, to fly free in the freedom of forgiveness, we pray it. In the name of our forgiving King, amen. Amen. Let's lift our voices together.